IBESS, Water and Aquatic Food Production Part 10, is the first of 3 movies on water pollution. This movie, Part 10, introduces water pollution problems by looking at the sources of freshwater pollution and sources of marine pollution, as well as the various types of pollution from the sources of pollution. Keep this in mind. Distinguish sources of pollution from types of pollution. The significant ideas are: pollution is a highly diverse phenomenon of human disturbance in ecosystems. Water pollution, both to groundwater and surface water, is a major global problem, the effects of which influence human and other biological systems. Here is the first of 2 slides that outline the available movies in the Water and Aquatic Food Production Unit. Use this outline to find the movie you need for review. This movie is outlined on the next slide. Here is the second of 2 slides that outline the available movies in the Water and Aquatic Food Production Unit. Use this outline to find the movie you need for review. This movie is focused here. Here are the first 2 IB syllabus statements. Define the term pollution and distinguish between the terms point source and non-point source pollution, and outline the challenges they present for management. Pollution is the addition of a substance to the environment through a human activity at a rate greater than that at which it can be rendered harmless by the environment. Thus, the pollution has a negative effect on the organisms in the environment. Point source pollution arises from a single, clearly identifiable source. Its management is easier to regulate because it comes from a single, clearly identifiable source. I will show you examples in a moment. Non-source pollution arises from numerous, widely dispersed origins. It is difficult to regulate because we don't know exactly the origin of the pollution. Again, examples coming up. Once again, here is the definition of pollution. You can read it on your own. A point source pollution comes from an easily identifiable source, such as this smokestack. Point source pollution is potentially easily managed because the source is clear and subject to regulation or a solution of some kind. Point source pollution comes from an easily identifiable source, such as these sewage pipes. Point source pollution is potentially better managed, as the source is clear and thus subject to regulation or a solution. Non-point source pollution comes from a more diffuse or dispersed source, a not easily identified source, and as such, it is difficult to manage because we do not know well the source. For example, fertilizer runoff from agricultural fields, or pesticides sprayed into the air, or herbicides sprayed onto golf courses. The green algal bloom seen in this photo is evidence of non-point source pollution, fertilizer runoff from agricultural fields. So that brings us to the next IB syllabus statement. There are a variety of freshwater and marine pollution sources. Now let's start with an examination of freshwater pollution sources and make sure you distinguish sources of pollution from types of pollution. The sources of freshwater pollution include runoff, sewage, industrial discharge, and solid domestic waste. Now, types of runoff pollution include inorganic nitrates, phosphates, synthetic insecticides, and herbicides. Types of sewage pollution include organic material, suspended solids, and pathogens. Types of industrial discharge include toxic metals, hot water, radioactive pollution. And types of solid domestic waste pollution include plastic, styrofoam, and other floating debris. A source of freshwater pollution is runoff. Water runs off agricultural land to rivers carrying different types of pollution, such as fertilizers, nitrates and phosphates, and synthetic compounds, such as insecticides and herbicides. Runoff as a source of pollution tends to be non-point source pollution and is difficult to manage. As a note, Fertilizers are inorganic plant nutrients, and insecticides are organic synthetic compounds. Runoff pollution can be an acute problem during torrential rainstorms or during snowmelt seasons. A source of freshwater pollution is runoff. Water runs off urban pavement carrying oils and gasoline, organic debris. Runoff as a source of pollution tends to be non-point source pollution and is difficult to manage. As a note, oil, gasoline, and organic debris are all organic. Plastics can be considered organic or inorganic. Urban runoff pollution can be an acute problem during torrential rainstorms or during snowmelt seasons. A source of freshwater pollution is runoff. Fertilizers, including inorganic nitrates and phosphates, run off agricultural land, resulting in eutrophication. Runoff from agricultural land can be chronic, in other words, an ongoing problem, or it could be acute during a rainstorm or snowmelt. A source of freshwater pollution is sewage. Sewer wastewater containing feces, suspended solids, and possibly pathogens, disease-causing organisms, is mostly organic. The release of sewage tends to be chronic, as the sewage is released to rivers daily, 365 days of the year. A source of freshwater pollution is industrial discharge. Industrial discharge of pollutants into a river can be seen in this image. Industrial discharge could include various types of pollution, such as toxic metals, radioactive wastes, or even hot water. Industrial discharge can be acute or chronic, depending on the circumstance. Are you understanding the terms acute and chronic? Could you look them up? A source of freshwater pollution is industrial discharge. A type of industrial discharge can be hot water, as seen in this thermal image of hot water being released to the river. Industrial discharge can be acute or chronic, depending on the circumstance. Are you understanding the terms acute and chronic? Why don't you look them up? A source of freshwater pollution is industrial discharge, water polluted by industry released into a storage of water elsewhere. Industrial discharge can be radioactive, as seen in this image of the nuclear reactor in Fukushima, Japan. Industrial discharge can be acute or chronic. In this example of the radioactive release of material, the pollution is acute. A source of freshwater pollution is industrial discharge, river water polluted by a toxic metal spill at a mine in Colorado, as you can see in the right of this image. Industrial discharge can be acute, as seen in this image. A source of freshwater pollution is solid domestic waste. Solid domestic waste includes various types of pollution: plastic, metal, styrofoam. The plastic and styrofoam are floating debris. Solid domestic waste pollution is generally chronic, but during river flooding, the movement of domestic waste into rivers increases acutely. In this image, we can see solid domestic waste as a source of freshwater pollution in a river. Microplastics have become pollutants in freshwater and marine ecosystems. Microplastics would be considered a type of solid domestic waste. So that brings us back to this IB syllabus statement. There are a variety of freshwater and marine pollution sources. Let's examine marine pollution sources and make sure you distinguish sources of pollution from types of pollution. Sources of marine pollution include rivers, pipelines, the atmosphere, and activities at sea, whether they be operational or accidental discharges. Now, the types of pollution in rivers includes inorganic nitrates, phosphates, synthetic insecticides, herbicides, organic suspended solids, floating debris, and metals. The types of pollution from pipelines includes organic oils or gas. The types of pollution arising from activities at sea include spills of oil and gas, and the types of pollution from atmospheric sources includes carbon dioxide, which acidifies the ocean, and some radioactive pollution, as in the example of Fukushima, Japan, in 2011. A source of marine pollution comes from rivers. Rivers carry pollution to the ocean. The types of pollution carried by rivers includes fertilizers, pesticides, domestic waste, floating debris, sewage, heavy metals, and the pollution can be chronic or acute. A source of marine pollution comes from rivers. In this image, you can see the Zambezi River emptying into the ocean. Rivers carry pollution to the ocean. The types of pollution carried by rivers includes fertilizers, pesticides, domestic waste, sewage, and heavy metals. A source of marine pollution comes from rivers. In this image, you can see the San Diego River emptying into the Pacific Ocean. Rivers carry pollution to the ocean. The types of pollution carried by rivers includes fertilizers, pesticides, domestic waste, sewage, and heavy metals. In using this image of the Mississippi River emptying into the Gulf of Mexico, I want to make note of the idea that pollution cannot be contained by national boundaries, and therefore can act either locally, regionally, or globally. Keep this in mind. Again, here is the Mississippi River emptying water into the Gulf of Mexico. Anaerobic, anoxic, not enough oxygen, regions occur near the mouth of a river that empties pollution, particularly sewage and fertilizers, into the ocean. These anoxic regions, severely low in oxygen, are known as dead zones. This is a photograph of the Mississippi River Delta in the Gulf of Mexico. Dead zones can occur in both ocean and fresh water when there is not enough oxygen to support life. Dead zones result from pollution being emptied by the river at the mouth of the river as it meets the ocean. Keep in mind that the pollution that causes dead zones would be particularly sewage and fertilizers. A source of marine pollution can be pipelines. Some pipelines empty pollution openly into the ocean, acute, while other pipelines have small breaks that leak pollution into the ocean, chronic. The types of pollution released by pipelines would include oil, gas, or sewage. Pipelines, if they break wide open, release pollution to the ocean as oil, gas, or sewage. This is acute pollution. In the image on the right, a pipeline near Santa Barbara, California burst, sending thousands of gallons of oil into the Pacific Ocean. A source of marine pollution can be human activities at sea, either operational or accidental discharges. The types of pollution resulting from operational or accidental discharges include oil, sewage, plastics, among others. A source of marine pollution can be human activities at sea, either operational or accidental discharges. The types of pollution resulting from operational or accidental discharges would include oil, sewage, plastics, among others. In this image, we can see floating debris, plastics mostly, intertwined with fishing nets, floating in the ocean. A source of marine pollution can be human activities at sea. Fishing, cruises, or shipping vessels all release pollution into the ocean water. And pollution cannot be contained by national boundaries, and therefore it acts either locally, regionally, or even globally. A source of marine pollution can be an atmospheric source. Carbon dioxide, as it accumulates in the atmosphere, dissolves in water and acidifies the ocean. Radioactive emissions near the ocean pollute the water. Pollution cannot be contained by national boundaries and therefore can act either locally, regionally, or globally. Atmospheric pollution of the ocean includes carbon dioxide, which acidifies the ocean. Carbon dioxide, as it accumulates in the atmosphere, dissolves in water, forming carbonic acid that releases hydrogen ions. Notice the shift in color. Dark blue means more acidic. Carbon dioxide dissolving into the water acidifies the ocean. In this image, we can see dead coral, and the blame for coral death or coral bleaching could be ocean acidification due to excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. As we begin to bring this movie to a close, let's look at some added types of pollution. Here's the IB syllabus statement. Pollutants may be in the form of organic or inorganic substances, light, sound, or thermal energy, biological agents, or invasive species. Some of this should feel familiar to you. As a note, here are the definitions of acute and chronic. I'll let you study this slide on your own. Light is a type of pollution. In this image, we see the light of shrimp boats off the coast of Thailand. In this image, we see the light of shrimp boats off the coast of China. Pollutants may be in the form of light, sound, or thermal energy, or biological agents, or invasive species. Pollutants may be in the form of sound. In this diagram, we can see that sonar might impact marine mammals. In this photo, the death of these mammals may have occurred due to sound, the military use of sonar. Pollutants may be in the form of light, sound, thermal energy, biological agents, or invasive species. In this image, we can see the impact of an invasive species, water hyacinth. Invasive species are biological pollution. Here we can see the effort required to eradicate an aquatic invasive species. Pollutants may be in the form of light, sound, thermal energy, biological agents, or invasive species. Pollutants may be in the form of thermal energy. In this thermal image, we can see hot water being emptied into a river. The red tide seen in this image is an algal bloom, a large concentration of aquatic microorganisms, phytoplankton. The algae produce toxins that pollute the water, killing shellfish. The red tide and its toxins are pollutants known as biological agents. A red tide is a bloom of microscopic algae that produce toxins that kill fish and make shellfish dangerous to eat. The red tide and its toxins are pollutants known as biological agents. Remember, pollutants may be in the form of light, sound, or thermal energy, biological agents, or invasive species. In this image, we can see organic pollutants, invasive species, and suspended solids. Pollutants may be in the form of organic or inorganic substances, light, sound, thermal energy, biological agents, or invasive species. Just to clear the air on definitions, here are the last definitions of this movie. We do have inorganic pollutants, which are compounds that are not organic. This includes some simple compounds such as carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Other inorganic pollutants would be nitrates and phosphates and detergents, metals, and glass. Plastics and rubber can be considered organic or inorganic depending on the origin within the industry that produces them. Biodegradable pollutants are simply capable of being broken down by natural biological processes, and persistent pollutants are compounds that are resistant to environmental degradation by the natural chemical, biological, and phytolytic processes. Persistent pollutants bioaccumulate in individual organisms and biomagnify through the food chain. Keep those terms in mind. The next two slides provide a written outline of the freshwater sources of pollution. The sources are given here on the left, types of pollution here in the middle, with some specific examples provided here. Study these slides on your own. Here is the second of two slides on freshwater sources of pollution. Sources are here on the left, types of pollution here in the middle, with some specific examples here on the right. Study these slides on your own. Here is the first of two slides that provide a written outline of marine sources of pollution. We have the source on the left, We have different types of pollution given here in the middle and specific examples over here on the right. Study these slides on your own. Here is the second of 2 slides on marine sources of pollution. We have sources here on the left, types of pollution in the middle, with some specific examples given here on the right. Study these slides on your own. And that brings us to the end of IB ESS Water and Aquatic Food Production, Part 10.